Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful presentation of 12 Angry Men and Women. Thanks to all the people in front of the scenes and behind the scenes who are making this event possible this evening. I just want to take some time to appreciate the role of artists in this moment. We're in the midst of an incredibly important movement around police accountability, around the human dignity of Black and brown men and women in our shared communities, and around whether we will step forward as a country in living up to its creed and our ideals. An artist, the visual artist, the performing arts, and all the many kinds of creators, you have a role in shaping and reshaping our moral imaginations. It takes imagination to get from where we are as a nation to where we need to be. It takes imagination to bring to the consciousness of people who may not have thought as deeply about these things. Existential to our communities are to see, to hear, and to feel. So thank you for using your gifts and your talents to help to lead us and to help lead our imaginations in this very moment. And as you all should already know by now, I think the world of Dr. Indira Etwaroo and the Billie Holiday Theatre. As a partner in this community, as a leader, as a center of artistic endeavor, it is always a real honor to join with the Billie Holiday Theatre in sharing with the Bed-Stuy community, Brooklyn, and the world. So thank you all. And once again, welcome to the first Black Lives Matter Plaza in the city of New York. Enjoy.
Very powerful symbol, and it is a gift from the Billie Holiday Theatre at Restoration and Councilmember Robert E. Cornegy Jr. It is a gift to the community.
Today is one of the most beautiful days that I've gotten a chance to experience in representing Bedford-Stuyvesant. The idea that we're going to solidify our respect and appreciation and support for the Black Lives Matter movement by literally putting that on the street for the world to see.
The No Justice, No Peace movement started right here in Brooklyn. And now is No Justice, No Peace, and Black Lives Matter. This street ought to be named here. This is where we started the rallies. This is where we started the protests. This is where the movement started. You can't get the fruit without the root. The root is Brooklyn. That's why I wanted to be here.
And this is a moment, this Black Lives Matter mural, it is going to span 565 feet. It is 28 feet tall or wide, if you will. And it's not only a statement to those who don't exist in the social space of injustice, it is an affirmation for those who do.
We're making a piece that basically signifies all the people that have been affected by racial violence, and so I wanted to participate in that. And to celebrate Black Pride.
Ujima, man, collective works and responsibility. Black Lives Matter, man, all day, every year, man. Black Lives Matter.
There is a house on fire, and there is a sense of urgency that we have to think about when we're thinking about Black lives.
We have been building Black empowerment, and this is exactly what this is about. It's about equity, it's about justice, it's about fairness, and we think that this is just a small pin in the work that we should do to build a monument to the work that's going before us.
Keep marching, young people, till we take down the walls of racism. Keep marching, young people, to make a change. Keep marching, young people, because we failed you. Keep marching, young people, because systematic racism must end.
So the Billie Holiday Theatre is theater home, the artistic anchor to the largest African American community in the entire nation. It was forged in the kiln of the civil rights, the Black Power, the Black arts movement, and before other mainstream theaters were diversifying their content and their casting, we had incredible Black artists who used the Billie Holiday Theatre as their launching pad.
We use art as our first line of engagement with the community, but also to challenge the norm, to stimulate conversation, and to make change. Because when you don't have the power, the truth is always in the art. Black lives matter.
The idea that we will walk out of our place of employment and see that on the street every single day.
It was important for us to be the first in the state of New York to send a message that Black Lives Matter. Now, it was said that it was going to be done in all the parts of the city, but there's no place that I believe that is more significant than in front of Restoration Plaza, the first community development corporation in the country. You know, its history and the history of this community has been that we're fighters, and we have stood up against racial injustice, redlining, heroin and crack. Like we've been at the forefront of all of the major things, and we're still standing, and we're still standing strong and proud. So this is just a visual reminder of how we fight and how we stand on behalf of Black folks, not only in this community, but around the world.
Mamie Teal asked for an open casket to show the world what was done to her son Emmett. This courageous act sparked the civil rights movement. The names of those killed by racially motivated violence in this country and painted into this mural. It's a courageous act of hundreds of Brooklyn artists. It is our open casket to the world.
ordinances against loitering.
Kind of cold to be working out here, isn't it?
He's reaching for a gun. If he doesn't calm down, we're gonna have to shoot him.
Get out of the car!
Shut the fuck up before we beat your ass.
Anything wrong, officers?
What did he say that I did that was suspicious?
You still haven't told me what I was pulled over for.
They didn't find any drugs in that house.
I set out with 2 of my sons. We walked all night and got as far as New York City, where we were violently arrested and secured.
He did not ask me my name or my business. The police officer just grabbed my wrist, swung me around, and jerked my hands high behind my back. He levered me down onto the hood of his cruiser. My bald head made a distinct thump. You have no right to put your hands on me, I
This is
exclaimed,
a high crime area.
said the tall white officer as he expertly handcuffed me.
You were loitering. We have ordinances against loitering.
In 2007, while talking to a group of black men standing on a sidewalk in Salisbury, North Carolina, for an article for the New York Times on the harsh anti-gang law enforcement tactics some law enforcement agencies use, I had discovered the main challenge of such measures. Police have great difficulty determining who is and who is not a gangster, especially black gangsters. I was not a gangster. I was a criminal justice reporter. My reporting was going well. I'd gone to Salisbury to find someone with first-hand experience with North Carolina's new tough anti-gang stance, and I had found that someone, me. Except I didn't fit the description of the person I was looking for. Now, I should note that my racial identity is complex and fluid. My mother is a Jewish-American immigrant raised in Chicago. My father is an African-American descendant of slaves from the Piedmont region of South Carolina. I can only speculate that his family originated somewhere in West Africa. I have ancestors who are Chickasaw and Cherokee. I imagine there are Irish immigrants in my family too, given my Irish surname and the vast amount of plantations run by the Moors in the antebellum South. The mother of my children is a naturalized citizen, a Welsh Polynesian American. I kid you not. My children are God knows what. In other words, I'm a typical American. Now, I had arrived in Salisbury around midnight, figuring that gang members would be more visible after midnight. So I found a local hangout with the help of a cab driver. Now, striking up a conversation with youth gang members in the middle of the night in an unfamiliar town is always a tricky proposition, even for a black man. But as a journalist, I've always counted on one common human trait that I've witnessed the whole world over. People want to tell their story, especially if they feel like they're being victimized. Now, what's the New York Times doing down here? One man asked me, his dreads under a sock cap. He and about a dozen other black men stood in front of a clapboard house. "No, man, you're a cop," said another man. Hey, man, this guy's a cop." No, you got me all wrong," I said, trying to sound casual. The men looked at me warily. I started to pull out my press identification card. "I'm a reporter, y'all. I'm just down here trying to ask you about your neighborhood." Now, in the distance, I heard the neighborhood lookouts calling, 50, 50, a universal code in American ghettos for the approaching police. 3 police cars skidded to a stop in front of us. A tall white officer got out of his car. He ordered me toward him. 2 other police officers, a white woman and a black man, stood outside of their cars nearby. I complied without so much as a question. The officer shoved my head down on the sheet metal, and he cuffed me so tightly that my fingertips tingled. "They're all too tight," I protested. He said,
"They're
"Nah."
not meant for comfort."
He replied. As the female officer delved into my back pocket for my wallet, she found no cash from illicit corner sales. In fact, no cash at all. She did find my evidence of my New York crew, my corporate identification card. After a quick check for outstanding warrants, the handcuffs were unlocked and my wallet returned without apology, no explanation beyond the suggestion that just my approaching young black men on a public sidewalk was somehow flouting the law.
This is a dangerous area.
One officer told me.
You can't just stand out here. We have ordinances.
This is America, I said angrily. In that moment, I was supremely unconcerned about whether this was standard police procedure, a useful law enforcement tool, or whatever anybody else wanted to call it. I have a right to talk to whoever I want, whenever I want. The female officer, she trumped my naive soliloquy.
Sir, this is the South. We have different laws down here.
After I'd been living in America for about a year, I purchased my first car, a $1,500 convertible yellow Triumph Spitfire. 2 weeks later, my brother, who had been in the States for under a month, and I were on our way to a friend's house. It was about 9 p.m. We were in Inglewood, a predominantly black neighborhood south of Los Angeles, when we heard a siren and a police car signaled for us to pull over. One of the officers approached my window. The other stationed himself beside the passenger door. He directed his flashlight inside the car, alternating its beam on our two faces. "Anything wrong, officers?" I asked, trying to discern the face behind the flashlight. No response. I inquired again as to whether we had done anything wrong. Again, no response. Instead, one of the officers instructed, step outside of the car.
Step outside of the car.
And with your hands on your head.
Put your hands on your head.
We did as he asked. He then told us to sit on the side of the curb. Grudgingly, we complied. As we sat on the pavement, racially exposed, our backs to the officers, our feet in the road, I asked a third time why we had been pulled over. Had we done anything wrong? One officer responded rather curtly that I should
shut up and do
not make any trouble. Perhaps foolishly, I insisted on knowing why we were being stopped. We have a right to know, don't we? We're not criminals, after all. I had not yet lived in America long enough to learn the ways of the police, the racial conventions of black and white police encounters, and the so-called rules of the game. Don't do anything. Don't say anything. Nothing. Don't do anything unless the officer authorizes you specifically to do it. Only say yes to whatever the officer tells you to do. The officer discerned that I was not American. Presumably, my accent gave him the clue. The officer looked at my brother and me, seemingly puzzled. He needed more information to process us racially. To the extent that the officers held the view that our blackness meant that we were criminals or thugs, the accent challenged this theory, but only minorly. However, at best, this challenge was partial. The officer could see that with his inner eye that we had the souls of black folk. He simply needed to confirm our racial stock.
Where are you from?
The UK, my brother responded.
The what?
England.
England?
Yes, England.
You were born in England?
Yes.
What part?
Birmingham.
Where are your parents from?
The West Indies. At last, we made racial sense. We made racial sense. The officers had located our racial roots.
How long you been in America?
The officer wanted to know, pointing at me. About a year.
Well, if you don't want to find yourself in jail, shut the fuck up.
Well, the history of that racial violence contained in his words existentially moved us. We were now squarely within a sub-region of the borders of American blackness. Our rite of passage was almost complete. My brother nudged me several times with his elbows. Cool it. He muttered under his breath. The intense look in his eyes inflected his words. Don't provoke them. By this time, my brother needn't have said anything. I was beginning to see the black and white of this racial picture. We had the right to do whatever they wanted us to do, a reasonable expectation of certainty. With that awareness, I simply sat there quietly. My brother did the same. We were in a state of rightlessness. Although I didn't know it at the time, we were one step closer to becoming Black Americans. Unwillingly, we were participating in a naturalization ceremony within which our submission to authority reflected and reproduced a quintessential Black racial experience. We were being pushed through the racial body of America to be born again. A new motherland awaited us. Eventually, we would become naturalized sons and daughters, Americans, Black Americans. Without our consent, one of the officers rummaged through the entire car, no doubt in search of ex post probable cause. The other watched over us. The search yielded nothing. No drugs, no guns, no stolen property. One of the officers asked for me to give him my driver's license, which I provided. My brother was then asked for his. He explained that he didn't have one yet because he had been in the States only a few weeks.
Do you have any identification?
No, my passport is at home. The officers requested that we stand up, which we did. Pursuant to the law of the streets for Black people, we were forced against the patrol car. We were spread-eagled and frisked and searched. Still, no drugs. Still, no stolen property. Still, no weapons. Neither officer provided us with an explanation as to why we were stopped, nor did either officer apologize. The encounter ended only when one of the officers muttered through the back of his head,
"You're free to go."
At that was all. And that was that. Although I didn't know it at the time, we were one step closer to being Black Americans.
That I was a tall black man was obvious to the trooper. What was not obvious was that I was a Harvard-educated lawyer and the national coordinator of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU campaign against racial profiling, and that what he was doing to me seemed to come right out of the police practices playbook that we were advocating against. I had flown from Seattle to Boston on the red eye from the West Coast, and I had just left a convention of representatives of over 40 nations of the indigenous people who call themselves Indians. I was there to make a presentation on racial profiling as a national problem and an Indian problem, and to help create awareness and solutions. My investigation had found that racial profiling in Indian country was serious. I had left the Indian meeting in Seattle that night right after the event because I had a racial profiling meeting for the community and advocacy groups at 10 o'clock the next morning in Boston, Massachusetts. Then I was scheduled to leave at 6 o'clock that night to return to Seattle to do the workshops and take tribal complaints. I arrived around 7 o'clock in the morning. I was energized. I had slept on the plane. We had landed on time. Time was tight, but I was on schedule. In Boston, I had left the plane and walked out of the secure area to a cluster of payphones by the street side terminal windows to check my messages. You know, the phones were close to the outer wall of the terminal, and my back faced that wall. After a short time, I picked up the phone, I glanced over my shoulder, and I saw a trooper standing barely an arm's length away from my right side, back against the wall, staring straight ahead. "Is there a problem?"
Is there a problem?
He asked. "I'd like to know why you're standing so close to me while I'm on the telephone," I replied. Without losing a beat, he jumped into action.
All right, show me some ID.
He demanded. You know, in that firm police voice, that you're using when you're showing authority. My mind was jolted. Was this really happening? I'm not showing you ID. Why do I have to show you ID?
I want to see some ID.
Oh, yeah, he repeated that order and upped his tone. I'm not showing you my ID. Why do I have to show you ID? What was I doing? The back and forth continued for several rounds. Each time his command tone got louder and stronger. The trooper kept ordering and I kept refusing. His command tone rose, but I made sure that mine stayed the same. I had gotten too many complaints by people who had said that their increasing tone of their frustration and even anger being illegally questioned and stopped and searched had led to their false arrests. It had become clear that police often jump the gun, morphing questions or protests into imagined assaults, leading them to arrest complainers and sometimes beating, tasing, and even killing them. So I started moving away from him. I stepped around the circle of phones. He followed me, going around the other side, and as he demanded, and I refused, I asked him why I needed to show ID, and I never got an answer. I moved into the intersection between the terminal entrance and the parallel walkway, and a trooper followed me. By now, a crowd started to gather around. Their faces looked shocked, as if seeing something surreal, as if they couldn't decide between the fascination of real-life drama and the instinct of self-preservation telling them to move on quickly before something serious happened. The trooper changed his approach.
If you don't show me ID, you're going to have to leave the airport.
And again, I said I refused to show my ID, and I went back and forth on this a couple of times more, and at this point, I thought it was important to identify the trooper for future reference in case the situation got worse. The problem was that his police ID name tag was turned around and I couldn't read it.
If you don't show me ID, you're going downtown.
Oh, yeah, I knew what this meant. He wasn't trying to save me cab fare, it was a threat. I took that to mean that I would be arrested and locked up. As I had done in the terminal, I started to walk away from it, and he told me to stay where I was. Am I under arrest?
Yes!
Now the situation was way out of control. I had heard these stories so many times, and now I was in the middle of one of them. On what charge? I don't have to tell you that. He stepped back and spoke into the radio microphone hanging on his jacket. I couldn't hear what he said, but a few minutes later, 3 other troopers showed up. They surrounded me. If there had been any doubt, it was clear now. I was not free to go. I passed the time trying to keep alert but cool. Sometime later, a trooper, Sergeant Kiley, arrived, surveyed the scene, and stepped off with the trooper. The sergeant then came over to me alone.
My officer says that you were acting suspicious.
What did I say? What did he say I was doing that was suspicious?
I didn't ask.
You're the supervisor, and you didn't ask him what I was doing that was suspicious?
He's been with me for years. If he says that you were suspicious, you're suspicious.
Okay. Stokely Carmichael was the co-founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, the organization of young black men and women whose sit-ins and boycotts broke the back of Southern segregation in the 1960s. 50 years ago, he said something that is as true today as it was then. The time is past for description. The time is now for prescription. I set out with my 2 sons. We walked
with my
all night.
Son.
Got as far as New York City.
We walked all night.
We were violently arrested and
got
secured.
as far as New York, where we were violently arrested and secured.
And treated in a bad manner.
We were taken back, treated in a bad manner.
I had no counsel.
I had no counsel.
Move! Move off the corner! You're not supposed to be on the corner. I might be having a conversation with my friends, like just hanging out for a little bit. Sometimes they say, please move. But other times they curse at us. Or they threaten us and say, get the F out of here. Get the F out of here before I arrest you. It's like I'm doing something wrong when I'm not. It happens all the time to all my friends. We all chill together. They just bother us all the time. They don't bother the grown people as much as they bother us teens. They just come straight at us like, ugh. I don't get wild with them. I might say, come on, we just got here. But then I leave. I can't stand it because I know I'm going to get arrested. They even pushed me before. For real. We get screamed at by cops for no reason. They feel like they can do whatever they want and just keep on walking. Where I live, a lot of police and DTs, detectives, hop out on people to search them, see if they got a gun on them. DTs are the worst. I never argue with them. You can tell DTs by their uniform or sometimes by their car. In the hood, if there's a gray Impala, then you know it's the boys. I don't see them hop out on grown folks as much as they hop out on us teens. It happens all the time where I live. They hop out and say, what you got? Then they get right back in their car. Sometimes they just search pockets, take money from us, just go right back in their car. I've definitely seen that happen. One time, I saw a detective stop a guy and search him. He found weed on him and just took it. Didn't arrest him, yo. Just took his weed and left him alone. Another time, they stopped my man, John. Now, they took his watch and his gold chain and just drove off. Once, I went to the store at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I see my best friend. He just come from the store. He passed me $1. He went the other way, and I was going to the store. I told him I was going to meet him in the house, right? A DT stopped him, and I didn't even know that was happening at the time. Then another one started running after me and checking me. I said, yo, what happened? What's going on? He ain't say anything at all, just started running after me for no reason. He had on a black hoodie, and I felt like I should have just ran because I didn't know if someone was trying to stick me up or what. He didn't have a badge on or anything. So normally I could have thought someone was chasing me, but I knew it was a cop because it was this fat Caucasian guy. I go inside my building, the police think I got something, drugs, weapons on me. But I don't. I respectfully tell them I don't, but they still check me. Yo, they check me in places I feel like they're not supposed to check. Like up the inside of my leg. I tell them, yo, excuse me. Watch out for my area. But they just do it anyway. If I ask them why they searching me, they just make up a reason. They lie.
My experiences with the police started off when I was a teenager in Washington, D.C., just walking down the street. It was when it was commonly known as the Chocolate City, and the cops would just stop me and my friends and verbally harass us about where we were going and what we were doing, and all of, under the pretense that they were looking for someone that fit your description. By my mid-20s, I had dreadlocks, which seemed to increase the harassment. I got stopped at least once a month, sometimes 3 times a month. Years later, when I officially moved to Los Angeles, I would travel back to D.C., and for an extended period of time, I would rent a room in the house of a family friend for a few weeks. And my daughter would stay with me and often play with my friend's 3 daughters who lived in the house. Now, one day, I took all 4 of the girls out to the park so that they could expend some of their energy before evening. On this particular day, I took them to a park in Adams Morgan, an area that is a fairly upper class, middle class part of Northwest DC. Now, when I go to this park, generally, I am the only black male around. Whenever I take the girls to the park, I stand where they are playing and I take a book along so that I can read, but also look up ever so often to check on the children to make sure that everything is all right. On this day, I looked up and I saw several police cars pulling up to the entrance of the playground. I thought there must have been a problem at the entrance of the playground. Down at the other end, where adults and teenagers play basketball, but the police were not interested in that area. They were walking toward me. As the police started to approach, one officer took out his billy club and motioned for me to sit down. I had no clue what had been the problem, and after all, I was just standing with a book in my hand, and as the officers stood over me, they began to ask me what I was doing. They told me that someone called them and told them that a black man was in the park watching kids. I told them that I was watching kids, my own and my friends. Just as I said this, the kids ran over to me. Uncle Nii-Odoi, Daddy, what's wrong? The police then saw that it was a big mistake. Started to apologize. They said they were just doing their job.
Despite all these experiences that had the possibility of ending up in jail or worse, there was this one incident which I thought I truly might die. It was a nice summer day in D.C., and I, my brother, and a friend were returning from a visit from my father in New York. We were driving my brother's car and had just exited the highway. As we entered downtown D.C., I noticed the police in the rearview mirror. I was braced to get stopped, as I had been countless times before. I knew all my paperwork was in the car and that it was in an accessible place where they wouldn't think I was reaching for a gun. That's something I don't think a lot of other folks have to worry about when they get into a car. But for me, when I get behind the wheel, I don't immediately think about a seatbelt or whether I have enough gas. Rather, I think, do I have all my papers and identification in an open place so that I can give them to a cop without making him think that I'm reaching for a gun? As I expected, the cop turned on his lights and siren and signaled for me to pull over, and I did. The police waited in the car for several minutes. Then I noticed several other cars pulling up. All that time, at that moment, the officer in the first car got out and approached our car. Since I already knew the routine, I had my license ready to hand to him. He took it, looked at it, and asked why I was driving a car that had New York State plates on it. I said that it was my brother's car, and that we had just got back from New York, and that it was my turn to drive this last leg of the journey. The officer gave me a suspicious look and returned to his car with my license. In the meantime, even more cars were pulling up, about 5 now, while pedestrians began to stop and gawk at the scene. After a few more minutes, the officer walked back up to my window and said,
"Get out of the car."
I asked the officer what was wrong, but he stood there and repeated his command.
"Get out of the car."
While this was happening, other officers were surrounding my brother's car and looking through the windows like they'd lost something. Then the cop orders all of us to get out of the car, and as we get out, we're all told to put our hands on the car. I was shocked. I could not believe that this was happening. Without our permission, they start to search the car, and they told us to stand still with our hands remaining on the car. I was getting very upset now. I had to be still, but I did not have to be quiet. I admonished the police about how they were treating us like criminals, and I asked them to search, and I told them that they didn't even ask to search the car or tell us why they had stopped us. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my brother trying to get my attention. When I look at them, they give me this look that says, "Shut up!" But I could only think, no, you might be timid, but I'm not gonna shut up. One of the officers closed in on me and began yelling at me to shut up, shut my mouth. And the other officers that began to move closer and were yelling at me. At that moment, my friend motioned for me to look behind me. And when I did, I saw that a police officer had his gun trained on the back of my head. After they finished illegally searching the car, they said that we could go. When asked why they had searched us, they replied that the window tint was too dark and that they had probable cause.
The scene. A calm, star-spangled sky suspended above Philadelphia, like the snatch of silence before a great storm. I was almost home when I was blinded by the blood red and cold blue flashing lights and deafened by the high-pitched gulp of a cry. I pulled my car over and came to a full stop in front of a check-cashing spot in a thin storefront with a handwritten sign that read, "Off the chain bail bonds." Possible, not probable causes cascaded through my mind. Maybe my brake lights are out, maybe my tags expired. Damn, maybe I didn't pay those parking tickets. Nah, I paid them. As a cop approached my car, crushing gravel beneath his bulky boots. Problem? I asked, as a pale, paunchy man whose eyes were veiled with tinted shades arrived at my door.
Where are you coming from?
The officer questioned. Brooklyn, I told him as I scanned his tag, L. Clark, into my memory.
Brooklyn?
He said, surprised.
Yeah. What's in Brooklyn?
I knew that because of the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, I wasn't obliged to answer his questions, but because I wanted to get home as soon as possible, I did. I was conducting an interview, I said plainly.
License and registration?
He requested as his eyes, chasing the orb of his flashlight, searched through my car. It's in the glove compartment, I stated.
Slowly!
He warned. My hands, moving in calculated slow motion, floated toward the glove compartment when...
I said slow.
The cop screeched as he grabbed the handle of his Glock.
Unless you want to get shot.
His voice harshened. My fingertips and palms, moist with the anxiety of sudden death, handed him my license and registration. Why was I stopped? I asked.
Hold tight,
He said, as he took my papers and turned around. Why was I stopped? I repeated as he wobbled back to his squad car. I watched him through the sharp panorama of my mirror as he ran my papers. Everything came back clean. No tickets, no warrants, no nothing.
Do you have any drugs or weapons in the car?
The officer asked. You still haven't told me why I was stopped, I stressed.
One more time, do you have any drugs or weapons?
He repeated, resting his hand on his gun again. I've got a registered handgun and a permit to carry it, I stated. I felt his demeanor morph, and I could see from the involuntary breach between his cold lips that he wanted to say something. The officer didn't ask me why I had a gun. He had something else in mind.
You don't mind if I take a look around, do you?
The officer slurred as he opened the door. Actually, officer, I don't consent to the search of my private property, I informed him.
You hiding something?
The officer pried. No, I said flatly. I'm exercising my Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures.
Step out of the car.
The officer ordered as he opened my door. You still haven't told me what I was pulled over for. What was I pulled over for? I insisted. Completely ignoring my question, he says...
What are you hiding, fucking nigga?
He vomited. At that moment, I was faced with two distinct choices. Life or death. This is exactly his plan. I chuckled to myself as I chose life. He wants me to flip. He wants me to flip. Nope, I'm not giving in. Not giving in. I told myself, attempting to prevent my blood from bubbling desperately, trying to prevent the death, which was just waiting above the scene like a vulture from occurring. I know my rights, I insisted. To which he threw my license and registration into my car and stalked off, frustrated at his impotence.
I set out with my 2 sons. We walked all night and got as far as New York City, where we were violently arrested and secured.
We walked all night and got as
We
far
were taken
as
back,
Set out with my 2 sons.
treated badly.
We were violently
Walked
arrested.
all
I had
night
no
and got
counsel.
as far as New York
I did
City.
not
We were
know
taken back and treated
what the law
Violently
was.
arrested and secured.
I remained 15 days locked up until my arms swelled and
15
my
days
appetite gone.
locked up until my arms swelled and my appetite gone.
I'm a black man. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina. For many people today, Asheville is known for its progressive and liberal spirit. This Asheville is not the Asheville I grew up in. I grew up in the neighborhood of Montford in the 1980s and 1990s, and then, before it was declared a historic district, which consequently drove up property taxes and resulted in an overnight influx of middle-class and rich white folks to the neighborhood, it was a majority black and lower-class area. I grew up just a few blocks from where squatters used to live. Nowadays, it's a bed and breakfast. A former crack house is now a European bistro. Now, of note, Montford also contains Riverside Cemetery, the resting place of Asheville native and author Thomas Wolfe. I bring up Wolfe for 2 reasons. First, whenever I leave Asheville, I feel as though I'm drawn back toward it. It's like I must look homeward, as the title of Wolfe's most famous book goes. Second, when I return to Asheville, I'm reminded, like another Wolfe title, that I can't go home again. I feel drawn toward Asheville in order to recover my childhood. Asheville, no matter how tough it was still the place of my beginnings, my childhood. It was my home, and yet I can never reclaim it. In October 2009, I met up with a friend of mine who I'll call John, also a young black man, and another whom I will call Chris, a young white man. I knew both John and Chris from other jobs, and we did our best to get together every few weeks. And on this one night, we decided to go to a club in downtown Asheville because John had received a promotional flyer for that evening. The flyer allowed us access to the club without a cover charge and gave each person, up to 4 people, 1 free beer. Now, we waited until 9 o'clock in the evening. We headed on downtown. The walk was a quick one, as the club was only about a mile away from my grandmother's house. And we walked up to the door, and we showed the bouncer our promotional flyer. He looked us up and down suspiciously. He kept glancing back and forth from the flyer to me, to John, to Chris. And finally, he gave us back the flyer and told us to go inside and have a good night. Upon adjusting my eyes in the relative darkness of the club, I quickly scanned the room, and nope, just me and John, the only black people here. Yep, well, that's what I thought. I thought to myself. Now, we all remarked we were thirsty, and we walked over to the bar. Chris, who was now holding the promotional flyer for the free beer, he gave the flyer to the barkeeper to put up 3. He put up 3 fingers to denote that we each wanted a beer. And he said, you guys got ID? The barkeeper asked. I reached into my front pants pocket where I keep my wallet. I handed the barkeeper my driver's license, and so did John and Chris. The barkeeper gave us a look the same as the bouncer outside. His eyes danced back and forth between our IDs and the flyer and us. These documents, he stared at them, seemed like a minute, until finally Chris said, "Hey man, is there a problem?" And the barkeeper looked up and said, "Hey, yeah, there's a problem. We don't take coupons." Whoa, it's not a coupon. A girl gave me the flyer earlier today. She was doing promotions for you guys. That's why we're here. The barkeeper just stared at John for a few seconds, and then he repeated it like we were slow. He said, "Like I said, we don't take coupons." "It's not a damn coupon," Chris said. It's your own damn flyer. You gonna honor it or not? The bartender, he looked at the back of the room. He motioned for somebody to come over. Good, I thought, yeah, bring the manager over here so we can get this handled. A large bouncer came over and grabbed John by the arm. And okay, boys, he said, it's time to leave. He grunted at us. John's eyes became wide. What, we're not doing anything, John replied. What, we just want the beer. The bouncer remained calm. He gripped John under his arm, just beneath his armpit, forcing him to the door. Come on now, you guys are out of here, he said. Chris and I both protested as we followed John and the bouncer to the door. At one point, John said, okay, we leaving, man. Just take your hands off me. The bouncer just moved more quickly to John to the door, and then another bouncer came up behind me and Chris, and he motioned us out the door as well. We rushed out into the cold night air. The bouncer pushed John away from the door, and just as we came out, John yelled at the bouncer not to push him. It was unnecessary, man. We already outside the club, and we're leaving the club without resisting. And as luck would have it, there was a cop standing on the sidewalk. He walked over to John with his hand on his holstered gun, and he yelled at John to
calm down.
John yelled something. I couldn't tell whether it was at the cop or the bouncer, but the cop grabbed John. He forced him to the ground and told him to put his hands behind his back. Now, I remember yelling, hey, you don't need to be rough with him, man. We already leaving. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in the middle of the parking lot. The cold January Asheville air on my exposed genitals brought me back to consciousness. I tried to get up, but my hands were cuffed behind my back. My head was aching, and I felt a burning sensation on my face, my chest, and my legs, evidently scrapes from hitting the pavement and being dragged along unconscious on the asphalt of the club's parking lot. My shirt was torn. My pants were torn. My underwear was pulled down to my knees. I could see a crowd of white people encircling me, trying to see the situation unfold. I was literally exposed to the world. As the cop brought me to my feet, I'm sure I gave that white crowd quite a show. Even as the cop tried to pull up my pants and provide me some measure of respect. That was ironic now, since he seemed to care about my dignity as a man that he didn't earlier. The cobwebs from my head were clearing, and I began trying to reason through what had just happened. Now, the last thing I remembered was telling the cops to leave John alone. I told him that we were leaving, and I told him we didn't want any trouble. Now, it was only later that I found out what really happened from John and Chris. They said, evidently, I was struck on the back of my head by the cop's partner, and I was tackled to the ground. I don't even remember falling or even being hit. All I know if it was his fist, a billy club, or something else. I still don't know to this day. I do know that I had a massive knot on my head, and days later, I had to go to urgent care because of severe pain in my neck and back. The doctors told me I had a broken bone in my neck and severely pulled ligaments in my neck and back. They told me that unfortunately, that such a break was minor and that my injuries were probably healed, although I might continue to experience bad headaches and even spasms in my neck and back. I would be fine, you know, they told me. I was taken to the police station. I was processed and put in a cell. I asked the officers, the one who drove the car, the one who booked me, and the one who placed me in the cell, why I was there. And I received no answer. I remember pleading with the cop who put me in the cell. I said, just tell me what I'm being arrested for. What are the charges? He replied,
you'll figure that out tomorrow. Maybe someone will bail you out.
No, I told him, I said, do I get to call anybody to tell them that I'm here? I heard no response except the clank of the door. I sat there trying to relay what happened over and over again. I wondered if John and Chris were also there with me. Now, I had been told that the officer who tackled me was reprimanded, but I was not told who he was or what punishment, if any, he received. I asked for an official apology, but I was told there was no alleged wrongdoing. They repeated this again, even if I said, well, why was he reprimanded if there was no wrongdoing? I was informed that there was no record of my arrest or the incident. I went back to the club and I talked to the bouncers from that night, and they told me that they had no idea why the cops beat on me or John or why Chris was so mysteriously overlooked.
We never talked about race growing up. Adopted by white parents, I don't think that was ever a conversation. The night it happened, I was only 19. Me and my friend Addison, who's white, had been hanging out at a friend's house when we got hungry and decided to drive down the block to Wendy's. During the drive, I made an illegal left turn and got pulled over by Officer Ricky Nixon of the Denver Police Department. I didn't have my license because I'd left my wallet at home, but it was the weed in my pocket and more in the trunk that I was concerned about. I wasn't surprised when Officer Nixon asked us to step out of the vehicle so the car could be searched. Addison immediately handed over his weed, knowing he was caught. Nixon told him to stand at the front of the car. While Nixon was doing his search, 2 more officers arrived. Nixon took my keys and started to unlock the trunk, and I raised my hands above my head and asked if he had a warrant. Then I heard one of the officers shout,
"He's reaching for a gun!"
I immediately started yelling, "No, I'm not. I'm not reaching for anything." And I remember an officer saying,
"If he doesn't calm down, we're gonna have to
shoot him. I could feel the gun pressed to my head, and I expected to be shot. At that point, I lost consciousness. The 2 other officers grabbed me by the arms, held me up while Nixon started punching me in the face. After a while, their fists stopped being enough, and all the cops used their radios and metal flashlights to take turns pummeling me while I lay on the pavement. The beating continued with my face in the gutter, and I was spitting blood. I began to lose track of what was happening. Addison was screaming for the officers to stop. More police cruisers arrived, and some of the reinforcements joined in. I blacked out, and when I came to, I was being handcuffed. And one of the officers said,
Where's that warrant now, you fucking nigger?
Another officer said, "You don't know how close you were to getting your fucking head blown off." I remember that there were about 7 or 8 officers standing around, chatting, laughing. An ambulance arrived. I had a broken nose, a concussion, and multiple head wounds that needed 45 stitches to mend. From the hospital, I was taken to jail, where I spent 2 days lying on the concrete floor with no answers as to why I was there. They tried to get Addison to say that I was reaching for the officer's gun. He wouldn't. He said we were friends. The cops told him
that nigga's
not your friend. They gave him a ticket for $160 and told him he could go. Nixon is still on the Denver police force.
Sometimes being a scholar of criminal procedure and a black man seems redundant. I'm walking in the most beautiful neighborhood in the District of Columbia. Though I'm coming home from work, I feel like I'm on a nature walk. I spy deer and raccoons, and I hear ridiculously noisy birds, and even more unusual in Washington, D.C., black and white people living next door to each other. It's more like Disney World than the stereotypical image of Washington, D.C. It's a neighborhood where I'm fortunate enough to reside. The time is about 9 p.m. and the streets are mostly deserted. And when I'm about 3 blocks from my home, a Metropolitan police car passes by and slows down. I keep walking, and the car makes a right turn, circles the block, and meets me. There are 3 officers inside. Their greeting is,
"Do you live around here?"
I know that answering the question will be the beginning, not the end of an unpleasant conversation that I don't feel like having. So I ask a question instead. Why do you want to know? The 3 officers exchanged a glance.
We got a smartass on our hands.
Glance. I get that a lot. Is it against the law to walk on the sidewalk if you don't live around here? I ask. When no response is immediately forthcoming, I say, "Have a nice evening, officers." And I head towards my home. The police now use the investigative technique that probably has a name other than cat and mouse, but that is the most accurate description. They park their car on the side of the road, turn off their lights, and watch me walk. And And when I pass out of their range of vision, they zip the car around to where they can see me. In this fashion, we arrive on the block where I live. I have a question, and so I stop and wait. For once, I have the power to summon the police immediately, quicker than even the president, who lives about 7 miles away. Now, sure enough, as soon as I pause, the car does too. The police and I have a conversation consisting mostly of questions. Why are you following me?
Why won't you tell us where you live?
What made you stop me?
We don't see a lot of people walking in this neighborhood.
Are you following me because I'm black?
Oh, we're black too.
Ah, the answer is true. But it is not responsive. I asked the officers if they have ever been followed around a store by a security guard. They all say yes. The senior officer, a sergeant, says that it doesn't bother her because she knows she's not a thief. The officers tell me that they're suspicious because this is not a neighborhood where they usually see people walking. You know, furthermore, they know everybody who lives in the neighborhood, and they don't know me. I ask if they know who lives there, and I point down the road to a house where I have lived for the last 14 months. Yes, they answered. Yes, they do. And so I walk up my stairs and I sit on my porch and I wait. I wait because I am a professor of criminal procedure. I wait because I remember the last time with different officers in a different place when I cooperated, which meant that I'd let them search my car, or rather I let one search while the other one watched me with his hands resting near his gun on 16th Street. Cars whizzed by and I pretended that I was invisible. Now the officers park their car and position it, and spotlights are on my face, and all three of them join in and join me on the porch.
You live here?
Yes, I do.
Can we see some identification?
No, you may not. The District of Columbia, through its 3 agents standing on my porch, tells me,
if you live here, go inside. It's too cold to be outside.
I am content where I am. So the police announce, are they? They will not leave me until I produce some ID or enter the house. I have arrived home late because I worked late. I'm writing a book for the Harvard Law Review. The book which I'm carrying in my knapsack is Race, Crime, and the Law by Randall Kennedy. Since apparently none of us have anything better to do, I took the book out of my sack and showed the officers chapter 4, Race, Law, and Suspicion, using color as a proxy for dangerousness. The chapter contains several stories just like this one. It quotes Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr. There's a moving violation that many African Americans know as DWB, driving while black, but this, I announce, is the first time I've ever heard of walking while black. I point to the big window of my beautiful house and I tell the police that I have seen people, mostly white people, walking down the street at all times of day and night, and I have never heard them question about their right to be there. This is why I will not show them my identification. This is not apartheid South Africa.
Hey! Hey!
And I don't need a pass card. The sergeant tells me that I'm being evasive. She will interview my neighbors. The 2 remaining officers radio for backup. They give the dispatcher the wrong address, and I correct them. Soon, the 2nd patrol car with 2 more officers arrive. And finally, my neighbor comes outside, identifies me. My neighbor is black like us. And I'm free now. I'm free to be left alone. I'm free to walk in public. I'm free to sit on my porch, even if it is cold. 5 officers get in their 2 cars and drive away. As for me, I'm still searching for a moral. My neighborhood doesn't seem so beautiful anymore.
One day, I was coming home from where I used to work. I wore a suit and tie to work every day. So that's how I was dressed. There were police in my lobby, and as I was walking through the lobby to get in the elevator, they saw me, and they said,
"How you doing?"
And I looked at them, and I said, "How y'all doing?" And then I headed upstairs, I changed my clothes, I threw on some jeans, t-shirt, boots, and a hat, and I came back downstairs. They had the nerve to ask me if I lived in the building. I told them I just came in the building 20 minutes ago wearing a suit and tie. And one of them said,
"Oh, no, you didn't."
My thought was, wow. I go upstairs and change clothes, and now you don't know it, brother. Okay, now, yes, I do live in the building. But I was thinking, I just came in the motherfucking building, motherfucker. You saw me. Yes, I do live in the building, yes. So now they asked me for my ID, and I showed them my ID. One of the officers tried to take it. Now I said, you see with your eyes, not with your hands. So I said, no, you asked to see my ID, not to take my ID. They called me a smart ass, but I was just basing it on what he said. They looked at each other and decided to let me go, so I left. Now, I even have a hard time going to see my mother. Officially, I live downtown. So my ID has my downtown address. My mother lives in the projects uptown, and I'm not on the lease for my mom's apartment. The police told me if I was to go there and my mother isn't home, they would arrest me for trespassing. Even if I have keys to her apartment, which I do, they said if I use my key to go into her apartment, they're gonna arrest me because my ID says I don't live there. So I can't visit my mother? Because if I do, and she's not home to verify that I'm her son, they're gonna mess with me and probably arrest me for trespassing with a key. Another time, I'm in the lobby of my building in the Bronx. I'm talking with a friend. We're just having a normal conversation. I don't know what went down to cause this. Before DTs, they rushed the building. They screamed.
"Get your hands on the fucking wall. Get your hands up. Hands on the wall."
From the lobby, they took us to the stairwell and stripped us. 4 big white guys pulled down our pants, the whole 9, supposedly because they felt we had drugs on us. They were saying,
"We know you got drugs on you. We gonna find them."
People were coming in the lobby. They saw this. It was crazy. It was crazy. Then when they realized we didn't have anything, they just left. No apologies, no I'm sorry. There's nothing. 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 They just left us there. And we just put our clothes back on.
Kenny called me in the middle of the night. He said somebody's kicked in the door and shot her. I was dead asleep. I didn't know what he was talking about. I jumped up, I get ready, and I rush over to her house. When I get there, the street is flooded with police. There's like 1 million of them, and there's an officer at the end of the road, and I tell her who I am and that I need to get through because something's happened to my daughter.
It's a loud boom at the door. First thing she said was, "Who is it?" No response. We both get up. She started putting on clothes. Another knock at the door. She's like, "Who is it?" Loud at the top of her lungs. No response. I grab my gun, which is legal. Like, I'm licensed to carry everything. I've never even fired my gun outside the range. I'm scared to death.
She had a whole plan on becoming a nurse and then buying a house and then having a family. Brianna had her head on straight, and she was a decent...
911, somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend.
I used to tell my daughters, Brianna and Junaya, how lucky they were. See, I didn't grow up where we were being told how college was important and that you needed these things for your career, but I would always stay on my daughters. I had this thing that I would say to them all the time: you got to be the best at whatever it is you want to be. If you don't work, you don't eat. So that means you got to be the best at whatever it is you want to be.
Another knock at the door. Brianna yelled at the top of her lungs, but there was no response, no anything. We put on our clothes to answer the door, which came flying off the hinges.
Brianna was a good baby. She wasn't a crier. She was a happy baby. She started walking early, like at 9 months, so she was just this little person early. I always say that she had an old soul. She would sing me the blues. Hilarious. Brianna would sing My Last $2. That was her song. Everybody loved Brianna.
I just let off one shot, like I still can't see who it is or anything. So now the door's like flying open. I let off one shot, and then all of a sudden there's a whole lot of shots, and we're like both just dropped to the ground.
Kenny was a pretty decent kid, too. His parents were both married. They were married, so he had a pretty good upbringing himself. In the beginning, they were just friends. I want to say that they were together like 5 years. They had talked about having a baby at some point. They had already picked out a name. Even before they had gotten into a relationship, Kenny would say, I'm gonna marry her.
Is the police officer that got hit okay? I aimed down when I fired.
A detective introduces himself to me. I don't remember his name. He kind of just goes on to ask me if I knew anybody who would want to hurt Brianna or Kenny, or if I thought that they were involved in anything, and I go, absolutely not. Both of them got jobs, they go to work, and they hang out with each other. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning now when the officer comes over and he says that they're about done and that they are wrapping up and that we'll be able to get in there when they're through. Where's Brianna? I asked. Why isn't anybody telling me where Brianna is? And he says,
well, ma'am, she's still in the apartment.
I know what that means.
I aimed down when I fired. Yeah, like I wasn't, of course, I didn't need to kill anybody. I don't know what happened. Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend. Oh my God, oh my God.
The first day, we're just all together crying and just trying to figure it out. And I'm just trying to replay things in my head, like I'm having all these thoughts. Maybe it's not Brianna, because you see, I haven't seen her yet, mind you. The police haven't let me see her yet. And I'm just thinking, I mean, I know that this is her house. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just trying to figure it out. And the police aren't talking to me. They're not telling me anything. My daughter is dead, and the police, they're not telling me anything. And I'm just wondering, why would somebody do this? Why would somebody do this to my daughter? Until I learn on the news that the police did this. They didn't find any drugs in that house. The funeral home calls me when they get the body. Everybody is with me, my whole family. When we see her body, it's just tears and it's screams. One particular morning, maybe like a month or two later, my sister, she writes this thing. It says, my name is Brianna Taylor. LMPD broke into my home and murdered me. And no one's been arrested or charged.
Brianna was an emergency room technician. Her job was to help save lives. But hers was lost. Over 20 gunshots by the police into her home in the middle of the night. 8 bullets that ultimately killed her. It took 20 minutes after she was shot for emergency medical assistance. Louisville, Kentucky, March 13th, 2020. I set out with my 2 sons. We walked all night until we got as far as New York City, where we were violently arrested and secured.
New York.
Set out with my
We
two
were taken
sons.
back
We were
and treated in a bad manner. I had no counsel.
We were taken
I did not know what the law was. I remained 15 days locked up until my arms swelled and my appetite gone. I did not know the law, nor what I should say.
Did not know the law.
So I thought it'd be better that the law have its course.
I thought it better to let the law have its course.
New York Tribune, July 18th, 1854.